Macmillan Audio presents The Trinity Six by Charles Cumming. Read for you by John Lee. For my sister Alex, for her children Lucy, Edward, and Sophie, and to the memory of Simon Pilkington, 1938 to 2009. A note on the Cambridge Five. While studying at Trinity College, Cambridge in the 1930s, Kim Philby, Anthony Blunt, Guy Burgess, Donald Maclean, and John Cairncross were recruited by Moscow Center as agents of the Soviet NKVD. They became known as the Cambridge Five. Burgess would go on to work for the BBC and for the Foreign Office. Maclean, the son of a prominent Liberal MP, also joined the Foreign Office and was secretary at the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. between 1944 and 1948. Philby became an officer in the Secret Intelligence Service, better known as MI6. Blunt, a world authority on the paintings of Nicolas Poussin, worked for MI5 until 1945, at which point he was appointed surveyor of the King's pictures, and, later, the Queen's pictures. During World War II, John Cairncross worked on Nazi code-breaking at Bletchley Park. All five men passed vast numbers of classified documents to their handlers in the NKVD. In May 1951, Burgess and Maclean boarded a ferry in Southampton, England, and defected to the Soviet Union. Their disappearance caused an international uproar. They had been tipped off by Blunt and Philby that MI5 were about to expose them as traitors. 4 years later, Philby held a press conference at which he denied being the so-called third man. He was exonerated in the House of Commons by the Foreign Secretary, Harold Macmillan, and allowed to return to SIS. 7 years later, while working undercover as a journalist in Lebanon, Philby boarded a Soviet freighter in Beirut and was spirited back to Moscow. The trauma of his betrayal haunts British intelligence to this day. Cairncross was identified as a Soviet agent in 1952. However, his involvement in the Cambridge ring was covered up by the British government. In 1964, Blunt also signed a full confession in return for immunity from prosecution. In 1979, Margaret Thatcher admitted to the House of Commons that Sir Anthony Blunt, one of the pillars of the British establishment, had been a Soviet asset for more than 30 years. MI5 and SIS faced a further bout of bloodletting. Guy Burgess died of alcoholism in Moscow in 1963. Maclean, who had been made a colonel in the KGB, died in 1983. In the same year, Blunt, who had been stripped of his knighthood, died at his home in London. 5 years later, Kim Philby was granted a full state burial by the Soviet authorities. Cairncross, who had lived in Italy for most of his life, died in 1995, 5 years after being named as the fifth man by the Soviet defector Oleg Gordievsky. The recruitment of the Cambridge spies is regarded as the most successful penetration by a foreign intelligence service in the history of espionage. In Russia, the men from Trinity College were known simply as the Magnificent Five. C.C. London, 2010. You know, you should never catch a spy. Discover him and then control him, but never catch him. A spy causes far more trouble when he's caught. Harold Macmillan. Chapter 1. The dead man was not a dead man. He was alive, but he was not alive. That was the situation. Calvin Summers, the nurse, stopped at the edge of the towpath and looked behind him, back along the canal. He was a slight man, as stubborn and petulant as a child. Gaddis came to a halt beside him. "Keep talking," he said. "It was the winter of 1992, an ordinary Monday night in February." Summers took an apple from his coat pocket and bit into it, chewing over the memories. The patient's...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?